Thank you.
Well, let me go ahead and start. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the governing board meeting of the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority on Friday, June 24th. I'm Dave Pine. I'm the chair of the authority. So I'd like to welcome you to our first hybrid meeting. A couple of logistical announcements. Public attendees watching virtually should connect to Zoom if they intend on making comments. And the comment functionality is not available for people who are using the webcast link. So board members and members of the public can make comments via Zoom during the meeting by using the raise hand function that we're also familiar with. So we have Devin today who's helping us administer the meeting, and I'll ask Devin to call the roll.
Good morning, Chair Pine and Authority Board members. I will now call the roll. If you are connected to Zoom, please unmute yourself at this time. Supervisor Goya?
Here.
Supervisor Peskin?
Present.
Director Holman?
Present.
Supervisor Gorn?
Present.
Councilmember Hahn?
Present.
Councilmember Lieber?
Here.
And Chair Pine.
Present.
Okay, we have a quorum.
Thank you. So as we do at the beginning of each meeting, this is now an opportunity for public comment for matters that are not on the agenda. If I could ask our clerk if we have any public comments. And I think I need to log on to see this, to see others. Is that correct?
Yes, I will be, this is Ann. I will be your second eye, but we do not have any raised hand from the public.
And we did. I would like to do that. I can log on to my computer if that's the best. Okay.
Right. And there are no public comments.
All right, no public comments, and we can move on to if there's any board member announcements today.
Yes, Councilmember Lieber has her hands raised. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I wanted to recognize in this public meeting the very dark day that this represents in American history for women, for men, for all Americans. This is a day that compromises fundamental rights. And I think in particular, I wanted to voice this at this meeting as a woman, as the legislator who created this agency, and as the beneficiary of a safe, legal, and accessible abortion. This is something that we need to speak out in all fora that we're engaged in and really speak for the majority of Americans. And anytime that we have a microphone to do so, speak up for rights. Today, it may be abortion. Tomorrow, it will be the environment and other fundamental rights of our fellow Americans. And so I wanted to voice that here today. Thank you.
Thank you for doing that.
Yes, thank you, Director Lieber. It is a very dark day. As my chair report today, I'd like to take an opportunity to thank two of our oversight committee members who are stepping down, and they are Paul Jones and Nancy Cave. They've each served for 4 years on the oversight committee and have done great work on our behalf. Paul, prior to serving on the oversight committee, was employed by the U.S. EPA, where he spent 27 years working on the Water Division Wetlands Office. And his entire career has been spent working on habitat restoration, flood protection, water quality, pollution reduction, and financing projects. And Nancy, prior to serving on the Oversight Committee, retired from the California Coastal Commission, where she had a long career overseeing many water quality, habitat restoration, flood protection, and public access projects. So they both just brought a tremendous deal of experience and perspective to the work of the Restoration Authority and did fine work for us on the Oversight Committee. We have for them a Saltscapes book. It's a beautiful book of pictures of the bay and restoration and potential restoration opportunities around the bay, and we'll be providing those books to them, a small token of our appreciation for their work on the Oversight Committee. So thank you very much to both of you. Let me turn over to Amy for her report.
Great. Thank you, and good morning. It's really nice to be in person with at least some of the board members and staff, and welcome everybody on the Zoom. I was going to give a few updates, starting with the State Coastal Conservancy budget for FY 22-23. The legislative budget bill that came out a couple weeks ago included the $350 million for coastal resilience that was in the governor's budget, and added for the Coastal Conservancy $120 million for nature-based sea level rise adaptation, with at least $30 million of that for San Francisco Bay. There's also a note in the joint legislative proposal, although it's not in the budget bill, about $300 million annually ongoing for the Coastal Conservancy for sea level rise. I think we'll have to see how that pans out in future budgets, but it's exciting. I think we're likely going to have about $500 million in the next fiscal year for coastal work and sea level rise work up and down the state and in San Francisco Bay. On the federal side, I've mentioned this a couple times, but just a reminder that, sorry, I've got a frog in my throat right as I'm trying to do this update. The US EPA Geographic Program received $25 million through the Infrastructure Act, and then $24 million in the omnibus federal budget that passed. I think it's been 3 or 4 months now. So US EPA has, I think they're putting out an RFP for $29 million this year, and then they'll have, you know, the remainder of that $25 million for the following 4 years. We are seeking a $50 million appropriation in federal fiscal year 23 for the EPA Geographic Program. We're also seeking funding for the South San Francisco Bay Shoreline Project to supplement the Bipartisan Budget Act funding for the project. The costs have escalated for that project, and at this point, the federal, non-federal cost share is out of balance. So we're working with the Corps and seeking additional funds for that project. The Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, Mike Connor, will be visiting Shoreline Project next Tuesday, and Valley Water is going to be discussing this issue with him. We're also seeking funds in federal fiscal year 23 for implementation of Belmer and Keys, part of the Hamilton Restoration Project. We received $1 million, the Corps did, in FY 22. That's allowing the project to get started, and Senators Padilla and Feinstein have both submitted requests for the $40 million, and I believe the Corps administratively is also supportive. So we're very hopeful that Belmer and Keys could get started with beneficial use of dredge sediment relatively soon. And then I also wanted to mention Highway 37. Jessica Davenport has been very involved with the Baylands group for Highway 37, and there have been a number of happenings recently related to Highway 37. For a number of years, the focus was on the ultimate project, which is looking more and more likely to be a causeway, which would be very beneficial for wetlands restoration. MTC and Caltrans and the local transportation agencies have put forward a couple interim projects. One interim project is from basically like Sears Point to Vallejo, and is a berm. And that is generating some concerns among the Baylands group. There's a tour happening, I believe at the end of next week, that Congressman Huffman is coordinating with many of the agencies to discuss the project. And then I also wanted to mention that yesterday I went to see the Newark Baylands with Trust for Public Land and a couple other agencies, Wildlife Conservation Board. So we had a really good tour of that potential acquisition. It is still a potential acquisition. There's not a willing seller letter yet. And TPL is working very hard to secure a willing seller letter and enter into an option agreement for the property, and then to raise the funding necessary, both federal funding, state funding, and applying for Measure AA funding to acquire the property. So that's the executive officer report. Thank you.
Thank you for those updates, Amy. It's very exciting to see the federal and state monies that are becoming available to enhance our efforts to restore the bay. Any questions for Ms. Hutzel?
We do have one raised hand. Go ahead, Director Holman.
I just wanted to very much thank and acknowledge the staff for pursuing and staying on top of the Newark letter for a willing seller. I just really want to thank you for that very, very much. It's a really important project. As you know, I care a lot about that one, and because of what the potential impact was if we don't pursue this. And so just, I'm grateful. Thank you very much.
One more raised hand. Go ahead, Supervisor Gorin.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Amy, for your report. The tour led by Congressman Huffman is on the same day as the all-day BCDC meeting that some of us are participating in, so I will not be able to be on the tour, but absolutely thank Jessica and the Coastal Conservancy for staying involved in this very important project, both of the interim project, and yes, I have some concerns about how that interim project might move forward, and the policy committee also shared concerns about the interim project not meeting the objectives of the build-out long-term project. So I think that Caltrans and the policy committee is trying to reconcile all of that, and do appreciate the involvement of the Restoration Authority and BCDC in that discussion. As you know, BCDC sort of started that discussion about the future of Highway 37 way back when, and indeed 4 counties have been working aggressively to try to keep that project in motion, forward motion, reduce congestion, and complete an affordable interim project that would satisfy some of those goals while not duplicating and interfering with the long-term project. So it is a work in progress. Thank you all.
Okay, not seeing any other hands raised. We'll move to approve of our summary minutes for the April 22nd meeting. Unless there's any changes needed, we can take a motion to approve those.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Peskin and a second by Sophie. So we take the roll call vote, please.
Supervisor Goya,
Yes.
Supervisor Peskin. Aye. Director Holman,
Aye.
Councilmember Hahn,
Yes.
Councilmember Lieber,
Aye.
Supervisor Gorn,
Aye.
Chair Pine.
Yes.
This motion passes. Agenda item number 7 is approved.
Moving now to our Independent Citizens Oversight Committee. We have our annual report in review of conformance with Measure AA. And I believe the chair, Paul Jones, is available to discuss the report.
Good morning, Chair Pine and governing board members, members of the staff of the authority, and others in attendance this morning. I'm Paul Jones, as Chair Pine mentioned, and I am currently the chair, but outgoing chair of the Independent Citizens Oversight Committee. And I just want to take a second to thank you very much, sir, for your kind words that you had for Nancy Cave and myself. I really appreciate that, and the gift that you mentioned. So thank you. I was under the understanding we'll start a PowerPoint presentation, and the IT team has that under control.
That is correct. Give him 1 second to pull that up for you.
1 second. Patience is my middle name. Improving that, I'll just fill in the gap by saying it was interesting to hear about the North Bay Corridor study, because I was represented EPA on the MTC-sponsored transportation corridor study that was 25 years ago or so. So you have to be patient for these things to happen in the Bay. Anyway, on to the report. This is, of course, our annual report to you, the governing board, from the Independent Citizens Oversight Committee. Next slide, please. And the members, of course, including myself, are Dr. Terry Young. She's our vice chair. She's also an at-large member. Don Arnold from the South Bay. The aforementioned Nancy Cave from the West Bay. Jim Fiedler representing the East Bay. And last but not least, we have our North Bay representative, Doug Wallace. Next slide. Our responsibilities include, of course, an annual review of the authority's conformance with Measure AA, broadly speaking, a review of the authority's audits and expenditures and the financial reports, and then to publish an annual report of its findings, which will be posted on the authority's website. And I'm sure that you have received in your packet today a copy of our letter to you, which constitutes that annual report. Next slide. So first up, and this is very important, is the financial information, a financial audit. And we're really excited to see another clean audit. It's an awesome finding, and we think it speaks volumes for how the rest of the remainder of the authority's work is managed. It's very clean, very thorough, and for those of you who are listening in who haven't seen that financial audit, it's very well, very professional, well done, very professional document, and it showed that things are going exceedingly well on that front. Authority staff continues to operate efficiently and effectively, and we would again reiterate that's pretty much in all regards. And the project-based budget is well managed. Next slide. On to project selection. You have a solid project selection and implementation process that's done, of course, with the staff working closely with the Technical Advisory Committee. And the BRIT advances both the Restoration Authority and other project permitting. And we support the BRIT and recommend scaling it up if that becomes necessary. The BRIT and the Wetland Regional Monitoring Program should continue coordination of both permit monitoring and ambient monitoring, as we recommended last year. This is a pretty tall order, and we're, as members of the committee, have enough experience in this to know how challenging this particular issue is, and we think it's really important to go full throttle on coordinating permit monitoring, that is the monitoring often burdensome required by various state and federal and local agencies, with the ambient monitoring that would be done primarily by the WRMP, and make sure that these two processes are stitched together and provide as much overall cost reduction and efficiency as possible. Next slide. With regard to project tracking and communication, we find that the annual reports, as well as the authority's website, provide fundamental information to the public about projects it's funded, and information regarding the cumulative benefits of the Restoration Authority's goals. And that's all great and can and should be continued. I'm sure you will. Next slide. Furthermore, we recommend, as we stated last year, and you'll find in our letter, there's as an attachment last year's letter, because we are kind of double underscoring some of these recommendations. One of which is that you supplement current performance measures with those that are a little broader, and that these would reflect important ecological characteristics such as landscape pattern and landscape connectivity, as well as ecosystem functioning. Next. And then looking forward, we would encourage you to update the overall restoration goals for the San Francisco Bay, not just those directly related to Measure AA, although they're obviously very important, but to look broader than that. And this is in light of the fact that, as we heard from Amy, that there's now a lot of additional state and federal funding that's coming into the system. And those of us on the committee have looked to the Restoration Authority as kind of a down payment for the very extensive restoration that needs to take place for the whole Bay. And we're going to encourage you to look broader, look a little bit beyond just the bounds of Measure AA goals, and to report on the authority's work with reference to that larger context. And continue to work cooperatively, excuse me, with other Bay Area entities who are involved in this work, such as the EPA funding and the work of the State Coastal Conservancy, to communicate to the public both long-term restoration needs of the Bay and the benefits of the Measure AA funds themselves. Next slide. And so that's a summary of our report to you, and I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, if I can.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for your report and again, for your contributions to the Oversight Committee. So just an opportunity for any questions from the governing board. Go ahead, Sophie.
Yeah, I didn't have any questions. I really wanted to make a comment that reading the report, it really reflected my own perception of the incredible success and integrity of this agency. And I just wanted to say that it's an honor to serve on the board.
Thank you, Sophie. Any other comments? This is not an action item, just an update.
Just a comment from Susan Gorin. Thank you, Paul, for your service, and actually thank all of the members of the Oversight. I really appreciate the detail of your report that you just presented, and especially your recommendations about continuing to engage and connect with other regional agencies to take advantage of the availability of funding, and to let everybody know that the Bay, the restoration of the Bay, is such an essential part of how we respond to climate change. So thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you. Chair Pine?
Yes, Mr. Jones.
May I have just one parting comment?
Of course.
Yeah, I would just like to take a second to thank the staff, and in particular Karen, but not just Karen, really everybody that we've worked with. And for me, and Nancy, it's been 4 years now, and they've uniformly been professional and timely and responsive to our needs. And even while they're being responsive, Karen is often reminded as well, you know, it's your process. You're free to do what you want to do, when you want to do it, and how you want to do it within the confines of our charge. And we really appreciate that. And I'm just saying that on behalf of the entire committee. So big thanks to all the staff and Karen in particular.
Thank you, Paul, for sharing those comments. I certainly 100% agree. We are fortunate to have the superb staff that we do. Any public comments on the item?
You have one raised hand. Go ahead, Ms. Kate.
Thank you. I also just want to echo what Paul has said. It's been a real honor to serve on this committee and represent the West Bay. And I urge all committee members to continue the good work and also underscore the work of the staff, as well as, of course, the board members. But as a former staff member, I know how hard that work is, how difficult meeting deadlines are and publishing, and your staff does an incredible job. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy, and again, thank you for your service. So we'll move now to our advisory committee chair report, and that's from Jessica Martini-Lamb.
Good morning, Chair Pine and board members. The advisory committee's most recent meeting was held on May 20th in 2022, of course. The Restoration Authority staff presented updates to the advisory committee on the community grants program, the proposed process for advisory committee engagement and yearly update on equity work, the pathway to a tribal engagement policy, and an update on the annual report and communications. As you will see in your agenda packet, the advisory committee also unanimously approved recommendations for the governing board to consider to advance equity for grants and programs in 2022. Lisa Horowitz-McCann, our vice chair for the AC and chair of the ad hoc subcommittee on equity, presented the work of the subcommittee to the advisory committee. And Lisa's here today and available to answer questions regarding the AC's recommendation. The ad hoc subcommittee developed recommendations to deepen the Restoration Authority's existing commitment to equity and build on equity considerations and actions to date. The three recommendations for the governing board to consider are increasing the cap for individual community grants from $100,000 to $200,000, and the annual amount for projects funded by the Community Grants Program from $400,000 to $600,000. Directing staff to engage the advisory committee in evaluating the progress and effectiveness of equity goals and actions, perhaps by developing a dashboard for identifying and tracking progress on equity goals, and also directing staff to hire a consultant to develop a long-term framework that includes values, guidelines, actions, best practices, and indicators or metrics that would evaluate progress and effectiveness. So those are also summarized in your board packet. The next advisory committee meeting will be held on September 16th, and that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you for your report. Any questions on that today? I just had one. Could perhaps you speak a little bit more on what the consultant would be doing? I don't have a good sense for this long-term framework that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think is Lisa promoted to panelist? If not, perhaps Jessica Davenport might want to provide some staff perspective on that.
Sure, I can jump in. This is Jessica Davenport, Deputy Program Manager for the Restoration Authority. And I worked closely with Lisa Horowitz-McCann, the lead on this ad hoc subcommittee, as well as other members. And we had a lot of great discussion, really happy to get this input from the advisory committee regarding the, well, maybe just to take a step back, I could run through how we are proposing to address the first two recommendations, if that's all right.
Sure.
So this recommendation to increase the community grant program budget from $400,000 to $600,000 is part of the budget proposal that is in your packet. And also we agree with increasing the cap per project from 100K to 200K, which we discussed at the last board meeting when we presented our community grants program update. And for the second recommendation of involving the advisory committee more in the equity progress that we're making, our staff, Linda Tong, grants program coordinator, has put out a schedule of how we will provide a draft to the members of the subcommittee to provide input before the staff brings your next yearly update on equity to the board. So those are the first two. And then regarding the hiring of a consultant, I think we'd like to have a little more discussion before making a decision about that. We got some feedback from Amy Hutzel that, you know, the Conservancy did a similar process in-house and did not require a consultant. So we might not need a consultant, but at the same time, our AC Vice Chair, Lisa Horowitz McCann, pointed out that our subcommittee brought up the idea that a consultant could add some outside perspective that the staff might not have, and therefore that could add value as well. So we would ask for flexibility at this point as we work through the various options associated with updating our metrics. And as you just saw, the Oversight Committee has also encouraged us to update metrics. In their case, the metrics regarding landscape scale connectivity and ecosystem function. And as you know, the authority has funded the Wetlands Regional Monitoring Program to better align their wetland ecosystem function indicators with the Restoration Authority's performance measures. So we're hoping the board will give the staff some flexibility as we look at all these recommendations as a package, in a sense, and how we move forward with potentially updating any indicators or metrics.
Great, thank you for the extra background. Appreciate that. Any other questions or comments? And let's check with see if there's any public input. I don't see any hands raised.
No public hands raised, sir.
All right, then let's move to our budget and staff work plan. We'll begin with a review of the budget. We have a new treasurer, Derek Hansel. I had the opportunity to work with Derek in his prior capacity as the CFO of Samtrans and Caltrain, and he's a great talent. And so, Derek, nice to work with you in this new capacity.
Thank you very much, Chair Pine. Appreciate it. Good morning to all the rest of the board as well. Derek Hansel, CFO for the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and Treasurer for the Authority. If we can bring up the presentation, please. Going to go through this pretty quickly, but certainly happy to address any questions. Next slide. Thanks. So we're looking at a budget for fiscal 23 of just under $26 million. As typical, our budget is broken down into the two distinct areas of the operating annual budget and a life-to-date budget for all of our capital projects. Next page, please. We have an operating budget of $1.5 million. That is largely funded by an administrative fee of 5% of the tax revenue being transferred to the operating budget, $1.3 million this year, and also includes an additional projected $204,000 in interest earnings. I would note that with the interest rates increasing generally, we are working with the rest of the staff to take a look at anticipated project cash flows and what we might be able to do to increase those interest earnings consistent with maintaining sufficient liquidity to meet the project cash flows. On the expense side, staff costs are increased by 6%. That accounts for additional projects that are being supported, as well as increases in salaries and benefits. Next slide, please. On the project-based budget, we have life-to-date budgets through fiscal 21-22 of just over $118 million, and proposed new funding for fiscal 23 of an additional $24 million, which brings us to a final adopted life-to-date budget of just over $142 million, and covering, as you know, a whole variety of projects. Next slide, please. Of that $24 million, we're looking at three major categories: $11.4 million for the South San Francisco Bay Shoreline project, $600,000 in the Community Grants Program, and that does leave just under $12 million of unallocated project funding. Next slide. So with that, I'm certainly available for any questions. I believe the executive director is also available for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Derek. It's an opportunity for the board to ask any questions they might have. No, I just had one on the amount of unallocated funding available for the next fiscal year. Don't we also have to deduct the BRIT in the regional monitoring program as kind of set costs?
I can answer that one. We've already, the BRIT, they enter into multi-year contracts, and so we've already allocated for that year in the previous budget for the BRIT agencies.
Okay.
And the WRMP, they've already received their first half of funding. The next half of funding will come in the next budget, so not out of
I see.
this
Okay,
year's
thank you.
budget.
Thank you for that. Sophie?
Thank you. I just had a question. I know that our staff works incredibly hard for the authority, but there's pretty limited funds for staff and overhead. And I just wondered if, in the future, is there any need for us to perhaps seek some matching funds or additional funds or somehow, or do you feel like you have the staffing and the time that you need to manage the agency with the funding that you have?
Yeah, I mean, that is, it's an interesting idea to seek funding for the support of the authority, and I think we could keep our eyes open for that. I don't see us as having a staffing issue at this point. I think we have a pretty deep bench, actually. I mean, it's really terrific that, for example, we have both Devin and Anne, and we've got, backups for me. We've got Karen and Jessica. So we've got Amy and another attorney that we can tap into. And the funding for MTC staff and for Conservancy staff has covered the cost to date. I think the Conservancy, I don't think we have billed the full $750,000 budgeted to us. I don't think we did last year, and I don't think we're on track to do that this year. So I think we're in good shape. I would also point out, I don't bill to the authority. I am part of the indirect costs for the other staff. So I think the authority is getting a really great set of staff at a very reasonable cost. Not to, yeah, I'm complimenting the other staff.
Thank you. It's always a concern when the money for the administration is so constrained. So I just wanted to ask the question. Thank you.
I do think, and I talked about this with Derek, we do need to make sure that we'll have funding after the 20 years of funding coming in. If the measure is not renewed, for example, we'll still have work after those 20 years to finish up projects. So I think we also need to be thinking about that in the long term. And if we do want to go back to the voters, you know, like at year 15 or 16 or, you know, something closer to year 20, we also need to be planning, and we are planning for ballot access costs.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And I did also have a question about the unallocated sort of, what is it, 11.9, 12 million? It's not allocated, but we have we've decided not to do, issue a new RFP. So we kind of, the money's not allocated, but we know already a lot of it is likely locked in, right? So, I mean, it makes it sound like we haven't made decisions, but we have made some, right?
Well, the decision was made not to do an RFP for this round, but we're re-looking at the projects that were submitted in last round. Those decisions have not been made yet. We're in the process of getting project updates right now. But we look at those funds, and then, you know, we'll give you the recommended list earlier this year than we did in previous years, since we're not doing a full RFP. And, you know, we will pull those projects out of those unallocated funds, but they'll be approved one at a time. And as you approve those, we'll pull the money out of the unallocated and list it as its project name and amount.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Why don't we check with the public as well?
No public comment, sir.
Okay, well, this is an action item. We have a resolution in our package, resolution number 98, and this would be a time to take action on that.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We'll go ahead and take the roll call.
Supervisor Joya,
Yes.
Supervisor Peskin,
Aye.
Director Holman,
Aye.
Councilmember Hahn,
Yes.
Councilmember Lieber,
Aye.
Supervisor Gorn,
Aye.
Chair Pine.
Yes.
This motion passes. Agenda item 10A is approved.
Then we'll move now to our work plan accompanying the budget for fiscal year 2022 and 2023. And I believe Jessica Davenport will brief us on that.
Yes, thank you, Chair Pine and board members. I just have a few points to make about our staff work plan for the upcoming fiscal year. So as usual, it includes an overview of staff work associated with each major task and the approximate % effort associated with each task. The staff costs are estimated, but during the operating year, only the actual costs incurred will be billed. As Amy mentioned, for the Conservancy, we haven't actually reached our limit, and we're on track to be a little bit under this year. So the work plan shows the grant program staying at 65% of staff time, and this is because although we are getting new projects, we're also completing projects, and in some cases, the new projects are actually moving the project from its planning to its implementation phase. So there's a little less learning curve for the project manager since they're already familiar with the project. And then the plan also reflects our continuing emphasis on equity improvements, including the development of a tribal engagement policy, which you'll hear more about at the toward the end of this meeting. And finally, it reflects the fact that instead of issuing an RFP, as we just talked about, we're going to rely on the 2021 Round 5 list of projects and any updates that we receive when developing a list to recommend to you in accordance with the resolution you passed at the last meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Questions or comments? Just one from me, Jessica. The 65% allocation to the Coastal Conservancy staff, Is that going to need to increase in future years as we take on new projects, or we kind of hit the point where projects go off at the same rate as new ones come on?
Well, it's for both Conservancy and MTC staff. But I would say that it could shift in the future. I mean, just looking at the way that's spread out, I think our support for the advisory committee and oversight committee are probably as low as they can go. There's a potential to reduce the percentage time spent on board meeting preparation. But it's, yeah, we may shift like 5% around in that area.
Right. You make a good point that the other areas really aren't, are kind of more fixed, it seems, in terms of the amount of focus they require.
Yeah. So as far as percentages, yeah, it could shift a little, but I think probably more importantly, we do have room to increase the budget number, the total budget and we did increase a little bit more, I think, for MTC staff this year to reflect maybe them taking on some more projects. And also, of course, cost of living inflation that will affect our budget as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, we can ask for public input.
There are no raised hands, sir.
All right, well, this too is an action item to approve the fiscal 2022-2023 staff work plan. So we could entertain a motion for that.
Second.
A motion and a second. Go ahead and take the vote, please.
Supervisor Joya,
Yes.
Supervisor Peskin,
Aye.
Director Holman,
Aye.
Councilmember Hahn,
Aye.
Councilmember Lieber,
Aye.
Supervisor Gorn,
Aye.
Chair Pine.
Aye.
This motion passes. Agenda item 10B is approved.
Thank you. So we now move to 4 grant items on our agenda. The first one is the D-Pave Park project, which is consideration of a grant of up to $800,000 to the city of Alameda to complete a master plan, 30% design plans, and a community stewardship program for D-Pave Park in Alameda County to provide for the park to have a range of habitats from subtitle and title to upland and public access amenities. And I believe Ms. McDowell will present.
Yeah, I'll be presenting, and if IT can pull up the presentation. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Pine and members of the authority. My name is Karen McDowell, and I'm presenting this project on behalf of Project Manager Natasha Dunn. Staff recommends authorizing disbursement of up to $800,000 to the City of Alameda to complete a master plan, 30% designs, and a community stewardship program for DePave Park in Alameda County to provide for the park and to have a range of habitats from subtitle and title to upland, as well as public amenities. Next slide, please. Okay. The proposed project is located on the most westerly tip of the island of Alameda at Alameda Point on San Francisco Bay. Alameda Point is home to an old naval air station and was officially closed in 1997. The area was transferred from the Navy to the city of Alameda, and since gaining a significant portion of land, the city has been reimagining uses for the larger site as a whole. The arrow points to the proposed DePave Park location, and the circled area in the inset photo shows the parcel of land next to the water. Next slide, please. This shot looks west towards San Francisco. The existing site consists of part of the decommissioned Naval Air Station with concrete runways and ancillary buildings that were built around the 1940s and sweeping views of the bay. The City of Alameda owns the project site and is responsible for the maintenance and management. Adjacent to the site, there's wetlands owned by the Veterans Administration. A consistently productive colony of endangered California least-tern nest on nearby old runways that are part of the Alameda Wildlife Refuge. The Alameda City Council has prioritized planning for the park, and the DePape Park Vision Plan foresees a park that embraces sea level rise and creates new habitats and tidal inundation. Next slide, please. As you can see here, most of the site is paved. The edge is lined with riprap and ice plant and other weedy vegetation. Next slide. The project includes plans for reuse of the existing concrete shown here is a long strip at the bottom. And next slide. This is the pretty photo. The concept for the creation is for 17.8 acres of the new subtidal and tidal habitats for shorebirds, waterfowl, fish, marine mammals, and upland habitat for terrestrial species. The park would be designed for habitats to evolve with sea level rise and to create additional tidal wetlands and with public access via a raised boardwalk. Next slide, please. The project design will utilize climate positive design, which will sequester more carbon than it emits. Additionally, the city will partner with San Francisco Estuary Institute as scientific consultants on the design and throughout the life of the project, focusing on ecological and physical processes and long-term habitat evolution and resilience at the site. Next slide. Project benefits include restored wetlands that will increase habitat connectivity for essential wildlife, a reduction in the need for shoreline management since the site will be designed to evolve with sea level rise, the creation of an educational opportunity for the public as a wetlands park within a dense urban setting, and engaging the community in planning and stewardship of the park. The master planning process will inform designs and will engage a wide range of youth and community organizations and includes the development of a community stewardship program. Partners and stakeholders that have been and will continue to be involved with the planning process include Literacy for Environmental Justice, SFEI, Alameda Point Collaborative, San Francisco Baykeeper, Golden Gate Audubon Society, Sierra Club, Community Action for Sustainable Alameda, and Friends of the Alameda Wildlife Reserve, as well as community members from the city. Next slide. Thank you for your attention, and please let me know if you have any questions. Amy Woldridge is here from the City of Alameda on the virtual panel and will be able to answer any project-specific questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. It'll be quite a transformation with this project. Really impressive. Any questions or comments? Director Holman.
Just one, I couldn't quite figure out when I was reading the report and from this, is this where the monthly Alameda Antique Show is? I was just trying to get a little bit more oriented.
I think Amy's going to answer that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Director Holman. Amy Woldridge with the Recreation Park Director with City of Alameda. It is not. The Antiques Fair is on the estuary side of Alameda Point, and this is on the San Francisco Bay side.
Okay, yeah, thank you for clarifying, because that's a huge expanse of concrete too, of course.
It is.
Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
And good work.
Thank you.
I don't see any other hands raised from directors, so we'll check with the public.
There are no raised hands from the public.
So this is an action item, of course, so if we can entertain a motion to approve this project.
So moved.
A second.
We have a motion and a second on the item. We can take the roll call vote, please.
Supervisor Joya,
Yes.
Supervisor Peskin,
Aye.
Director Holman,
Yes.
Councilmember Hahn,
Yes.
Councilmember Lieber,
Aye.
Supervisor Gorn,
An enthusiastic yes. Thank you.
Chair Pine.
Yes.
This motion passes. Agenda item 11 is approved.
Very good. So our next grant item is the Bayland Habitat Restoration and Community Engagement in East Palo Alto. I'm not sure who's presenting on this one.
I'm presenting this, Chair Pine. This is Virgilio from the Coastal Conservancy.
Great, welcome.
Thank you. And just waiting on the PowerPoint. Great, thank you. Morning, Chair Pine, Restoration Authority board members and members of the public. My name is Virgilio Kwasai, and today I'm recommending that the authority disperse up to $688,016 to grassroots ecology for restoring and enhancing marsh upland transition zone habitat along the San Francisco Bay Trail in Ravenswood Open Space Preserve and at the adjacent Cooley Landing Park. Next slide, please. Underground activities will take place at 2 adjacent locations in East Palo Alto. The first of these locations is Ravenswood Open Space Preserve. The land that would eventually become the preserve spent years as a salt production pond before being purchased by the Mid-Peninsula Open Space District, also known as MidPen, in 1981. Efforts to restore the area to marshland began in the year 2000, starting with a planned levee breach that allowed bay water to rejuvenate the area. A key segment of Bay Trail was constructed in 2016 through Ravenswood Marsh, making the preserve an increasingly popular destination for visitors. The second location for grant activities is Cooley Landing Park, which sits adjacent to Ravenswood directly to the south. The 9-acre park is operated by the City of East Palo Alto, with ownership divided between the city as well as MidPen. After 25 years as a municipal dump, Cooley Landing was restored and opened to the public in 2012. Next slide, please. Together, Ravenswood Open Space Preserve and Cooley Landing offer 385 acres of tidal marsh and upland habitat along the San Francisco Bay shoreline and serve as vital open space to the local communities of East Palo Alto. While efforts to restore the area's marsh habitat have largely been successful, its marsh upland transition zone is overrun by non-native plants, as seen in the slide, and would benefit from the work proposed in this project. Next slide, please. The lead applicant on this project, Grassroots Ecology, has been leveraging power of the community to create healthy ecosystems across Silicon Valley as an independent organization since 2016. They currently oversee 25 multi-year restoration projects in partnership with 9 cities from Redwood City to Los Gatos. The native plant nursery they operate specializes in local native plants, which allows them to grow the diverse selection of plants used for restoration projects such as this one. Their extensive experience with youth workforce development programs makes them well suited to deliver the workforce development element of this project. Next slide, please. Recognizing the power of local communities, Grassroots Ecology has partnered with Climate Resilient Communities, also known as CRC, to deliver the community engagement element of this project. With its deep ties to the local East Palo Alto community, CRC will connect groups such as Anamatagi Polynesian Voices and Nuestra Casa to the resources and activities proposed in this project. Next slide, please. The project consists of 3 main elements: habitat restoration, workforce development, and community engagement. The habitat restoration element consists of invasive plant removal and native plant revegetation along 1.3 miles of Bay Trail alignment, and a section of Cooley Landing for up to 3 acres total. Invasive plant removal will include manually removing plants such as Russian thistle and black mustard, and applying chemical treatments for perennial pepperweed and fennel as needed. Native plant revegetation will involve growing and planting a diverse selection of up to 3,000 native plants grown at the nearby nursery and direct seeding on up to 2,400 linear feet of the project site. Next slide. The workforce development component involves hiring local youth as paid restoration interns. Throughout a 12-week span, interns will be trained by grassroots ecology staff and industry professionals to install and maintain native plants, implement integrated plant management, and manage critical endangered species habitat. Next slide. As mentioned in the previous slide, climate resilient communities will lead the community engagement element. CRC will work directly with local East Palo Alto community and through its network of community-based organizations to develop a connection with the Open Space Preserve and Cooley Landing to encourage stewardship of these lands. CRC will hold seminars on environmental topics, lead habitat restoration and stewardship events, and provide stipends to those who participate in stewardship and leadership training. Next slide. Improving this project will provide positive and long-term impacts to the East Palo Alto community and the San Francisco Bay Area at large by restoring and enhancing natural habitats along the shoreline of Ravenswood Open Space Preserve and Cooley Landing, as well as newly connected segment of the Bay Trail. By protecting sensitive marsh wildlife and enhancing climate resilience. By empowering people from local historically underrepresented communities to become invested in the restoration effort, to become stewards of their local coastal resources. By training local youth in habitat restoration practices, preparing them for careers in sustainable land management, and benefit visitors to the Open Space Preserve and trail alignments, which have seen recent upticks in usage by giving visitors access to a landscape with increased aesthetic value. Next slide. Here today are Junko Bryant, Assistant Director of Grassroots Ecology, and Violent Sayena, Founder and Executive Director of Climate Resilient Communities, who would like to say a few words about their project. They'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll go ahead and take any comments from the two folks you just mentioned.
Thank you, Chair Pine and members of the board. Thanks so much for considering our project for funding under this grant program. I just wanted to say that we're really excited about this project because we'll not only get to work on this really incredibly important habitat area, but because of this partnership with Climate Resilient Communities, which is new for us. Grassroots Ecology has done habitat restoration with volunteers for many years, but the depth of the community engagement planned for this project is a lot greater than some of our past projects. So we're really looking forward to this partnership and learning from each other. And I'd like to let Violet say a couple words here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Junko, and thank you everyone for the opportunity. My name is Violet and I'm with Climate Resilient Communities. I just want to add on to what Junko mentioned and also Virgilio about the value of this project to the community. The community are looking for opportunities to connect to nature, and this project, when funded, we will be able to offer that opportunity to engage our community and assist our community, providing capacity building to enable them to step up and engage and take care of their surrounding environment. So thank you very much for considering this project.
Thank you for your comments. I'll just add my personal perspective, since I'm very familiar with this stretch of the shoreline. It really is a fabulous area, and the renovation or restoration that's occurred in the past has really been amazing. The Cooley Landing is just an incredible asset. So it's really exciting to see a project like this that's going to bring the local community make the local community more involved in ongoing restoration and habitat preservation. Very, very exciting project. Questions or comments from my colleagues? Karen Holman, who sits on the Mid-Penn board, I'm sure has some perspective. Go ahead, Karen.
I do, and thank you. Yeah, and to get the full name out there, it's Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, because nobody could think of a longer name. Yes, thank you. Good to see you again, Junko. Some funding requests came to the Mid-Penn board just the other night too, so we saw each other most recently. So this is, I agree with what you said, Chair Pine. This is a really important area, and one of the things that's so very important about this is when I was running for this seat on Mid-Penn a few years ago, I was a little taken aback, although there was great support by the community in voting for Measure AA to establish a parcel tax to support Mid-Penn projects across the area. When I was campaigning, I noticed pretty quickly that there weren't that many people who were aware of Cooley Landing or Ravenswood or this area. So the fact that you're engaging the local community as being part of the workers who are going to be working on this project is, I think, really critical to help educate, inform, and connect, literally connect people to this area. A question similar to something I asked the other evening, and it seems important here too. You mentioned Ridgeways Rail, and one of the, because it is an endangered species, and one of the things that you do, of course, with all the plantings is help create and restore habitat. And if I recall correctly, and please do speak up if I didn't catch this correctly. If I recall correctly, that you don't have the ability to track habitat creation in terms of how animals come back or how creatures come back. And the reason I mentioned Ridgeways Rail in particular is not because it's an endangered species, because I was in the Palo Alto Baylands, not very far from here, just last week hiking, and observed someone who was out at a point and with her camera and had been stationed there regularly. And she said she hadn't seen a Ridgeways Rail in months. They had seen some further into Bixby Park, further south, but not along here. So if I got it incorrect that you don't have the capacity to track how wildlife is coming back, then please correct me. If you don't have the capacity to do that, is there something that ought to be considered to accommodate that? So long question there. Sorry for that. Okay, thanks, Junko.
Yeah, sure. We do have some budget in this grant proposal to do some monitoring. It's not extensive, but we also have the San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory as one of our partners for some limited work as well. So I don't think it's not going to be an extensive biological monitoring, but we definitely will be, documenting any birds and other wildlife that we find out there. Hopefully that.
So birds will be monitored by a specific organization, and do you guys, as Grassroots Ecology, do you guys monitor the wildlife on the ground?
We don't have like a certified sort of monitoring program per se, but we do, document things that are observed. So it's not like a rigorous scientific protocol, but more of just an observational basis.
Okay. I put it to other board members. I don't want to try to upset the apple cart here, but I'm just wondering if there today or in some other fashion, some other item we might consider creating some way that ground wildlife can be monitored, and the improvement and success of the program can be monitored in that way. Because it's a lot of good work that's being done, and it'd be nice to be able to know that it's being done on all levels, because it's that's the one area where I see that isn't being gauged.
Yeah.
I certainly look forward to any other comments.
Director Holman, I wanted to chime in on that one because I think it goes back to what Paul was talking about with the Oversight Committee recommendations, and really the strong interest of doing regional monitoring and making sure that any project-specific monitoring is part of an overall regional monitoring program. So I think the funding that we've provided for the Wetland Regional Monitoring Program, that really is the goal, to be doing monitoring, for example, of ridgeways rails or of other birds, other wildlife, but making sure we're doing it on a regional basis, or that projects are following regional protocols, so that this information, and some of it could be done citizen science, but it's all feeding into a regional picture. And I know with the ridgeways rails, just on the tour yesterday at Newark Baylands, I was talking with the Fish and Wildlife Service folks. There has been an effort over the past probably decade to ensure that the monitoring of ridgeways rails across the bay is being done following a set of protocols, so that the data can be combined and looked at over years, and so we have an actual understanding of the population of ridgeways rails. So I would say I think we should look to the Wetland Regional Monitoring Program and the scientists involved in that to really help guide the monitoring that we are funding as part of the projects.
Well, thank you a lot for that. It helps me connect the dots and feel more assured that that these activities and improvements are going to be monitored and are being monitored for a wide range of improvements. So thank you very much. I feel much better.
Any additional comments or questions? Seeing none from the board, we can ask for public input.
I think Sally has her hand raised.
Oh, my apologies, Director Lieber. Go ahead, Director Lieber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having a little bit of technical difficulty here, but I just wanted to add my kudos to the organizations involved and to staff. It's very good to see this project. This is one of the gems and an important connector in terms of the Bay Trail. And I think that this work will take this project to the next step. We've seen how incredibly important the Bay has become during the pandemic, and the need to find staycations in town. And I think that this is really going to make this even a more important asset for the community. And this community in particular deserves the community engagement and paid youth participation. That's how we grow the next generation of environmentalists. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lieber. And we'll check with the public for any public comment.
There are no public comments, sir.
Okay, then we are in a position to take action on the item.
I'd like to move approval of the recommendation.
Second.
Very good. We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Supervisor Joya?
Yes.
Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Director Holman?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Councilmember Hahn?
Also an enthusiastic yes.
Councilmember Lieber?
Yes.
Supervisor Gorn?
Yes.
Chair Pine?
Yes.
This motion passes. Agenda item 12 is approved.
Okay, fantastic. Moving to item 13, which is a Safer Bay Planning Project. SAFER stands for the Strategy to Advance Flood Protection Ecosystems and Recreation along the San Francisco Bay. So we'll have a presentation on this by Laura. I'm sorry, I might mispronounce your last name, Jolenko?
Cholodenko.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Pine and Authority Board members. As you said, my name is Laura Cholodenko, and I'm here to recommend authorization to disperse up to $1 million to the San Francisco Creek Joint Powers Authority, who will conduct planning, perform data collection and analysis, develop design plans, and prepare program level and project level environmental review documentation for the Safer Bay project. Yeah. Oh, no slides. Thank you. Next slide, please. The project is located along approximately 7 miles of shoreline in San Mateo County. This area is currently exposed to coastal flooding affecting disadvantaged communities in East Palo Alto and Menlo Park. The project would design and evaluate coastal flood protection for different reaches of this shoreline that would be resilient to 3.5 feet of sea level rise. Habitat restoration and recreation improvements would be integrated into the designs to the extent possible. Next slide. The project area is broken down into 8 different reaches. Environmental review will be made at a program level for the reaches that are shown on this figure in dashed lines. And for 2 of the reaches, there will be a project level or more detailed environmental review and engineering designs developed. One of those reaches is at the Ravenswood Pond Complex. That's part of the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge, and it is shown in mint green, and there's a solid band of solid green lines around the PG&E substation north of the Dumbarton Bridge. The second reach that will be evaluated at a project level is along the shoreline of East Palo Alto, and that one is shown in a solid orange line. Next slide. The image on the right here is a conceptual design for the Ravenswood Reach. The brown line in this image represents a new levee that would be built around the PG&E substation. And outboard of that is a habitat transition slope that will provide habitat for wildlife and protect the levee. Then those 2 ponds, ponds R1 and R2, would be reconnected to Ravenswood Slough to allow tidal flows to enter the ponds, which will facilitate sediment accretion and over time the development of tidal marsh vegetation. Next slide. This slide shows pictures of the project reach along East Palo Alto. The top picture is an image of a section of the Bay Trail, and as you can tell, it could use some improvements. It's in a somewhat degraded state. The bottom figure shows a levee in this reach with the Bay Trail on top, and it's next to Faber Marsh, and there's also it's also next to San Francisco Creek, and you can see that there's been some recent flood protection work that was completed by the JPA in this area. Next slide. This is a conceptual design for East Palo Alto, showing a new levee with the Bay Trail on top, and then outboard of the levee would be a gentle sloping habitat area for wildlife to, again, seek refuge during periods of high tide. It also gives the marsh space to transgress inward in response to sea level rise. Next slide. The JPA has already initiated outreach about this project. These are some pictures showing recent tours of the different reaches with regulators and community members. The middle picture shows a group of 9th graders who are learning about marshes and how they can act as sponges to absorb flood water. The project proposed for funding includes development of a community engagement plan that would be implemented by nonprofit organizations already working in the area. Some of those have been mentioned by Virgilio in the previous presentation. Goals of engagement are to provide information about the project, to solicit input on design and construction, and increase awareness and visitation to the shoreline, and encourage new and diverse outdoor recreation and conservation leaders. Next slide. Benefits of implementing the Safer Bay project include reduced flood risk for thousands of parcels in Menlo Park and East Palo Alto, restoration of hundreds of acres of wetlands, as well as establishment of new trails and enhanced trail segments. And in the long run, this project will improve community resilience to climate change and create a more diverse, biologically diverse and natural shoreline, and it will increase access to natural areas and recreational opportunities. I would like to introduce or have Margaret Bruce unmuted. She is the Executive Director of the JPA and is here to say a few words about the project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. Yes, this is Margaret Bruce. I am so delighted to be here. Thank you so much, members of the Restoration Authority Board. As Laura said, I'm Margaret Bruce, Executive Director of the Joint Powers Authority, and I'm also joined by Tess Byler, who is a Senior Project Manager and the lead on the Safer Bay project for us. We're very grateful for the prospect of this funding. We have a team of design engineers and scientists ready to tackle this complicated project. And as you may already know, we're teaming with some of the same wonderful groups that you have just approved, including Climate Resilient Communities and New Western Casa. This crucial funding will enable significant progress for us on advancing engineering designs and environmental studies that are necessary for CEQA and NEPA. The formation of a citizens advisory group is part of our sustained community engagement efforts, as well as additional biological and hydrological assessments. We've, in the recent past, provided tours to many interested stakeholders for this project, including members of the BRIT and the Restoration Authority. And those have been great mutual learning opportunities, and we would be delighted to provide tours for anyone else who is interested in the Safer Bay project. So please contact us if you would like to have a tour. We're just looking forward to this funding and would be proud and grateful to acknowledge the support of the Restoration Authority that enables our progress on the Safer Bay project. We look forward to protecting our communities, homes, and businesses, and also the treasured inhabitants of all of the marshes, from birds to tiny mice to all the rest. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Laura, for your presentations. I have the opportunity to serve on the San Francisco Creek Joint Powers Authority Board and share Margaret's excitement about the how this grant funding will further the Safer Bay project. It's a really remarkable 7-mile stretch of the bay, very complex stretch of property, but this money will really be a catalyst for additional progress. And let's see if we have any questions or comments. Karen Holman.
Yeah, I also support this project greatly. It solves a lot of things. And the last time that there was a significant flood, a lot of East Palo Alto was underwater. I shouldn't say underwater, that's too extreme, but a lot of flooding happened at homes in East Palo Alto. So this is really an important project, a very important project. So I absolutely support it. And I would love to have a tour.
Wonderful, Director Holman. We would be delighted to host you.
Sally Lieber.
Thank you, Chair. I very much agree with my fellow Director Holman. The flooding in this area has been so demoralizing over time, and the double bottom line of the improvements that are proposed here is just really such a positive for the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lieber. Any other comments from board members? I don't see any hands. So let's check with the public.
There are no public comments.
All right. Well, of course, this is an action item, and I will go ahead and make a motion to approve the Safer Bay planning funding.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. If we could have the vote, please.
Supervisor Joya,
Yes. Sorry, I was muted. Yes.
Supervisor Peskin,
Aye.
Director Holman,
Yes.
Councilmember Hahn,
Yes.
Councilmember Lieber,
Aye.
Supervisor Gorn,
Aye, and my video has been disabled. Could someone turn it back on, please?
Chair Pine.
Yes.
This motion passes. Agenda item 13 is approved.
Okay, Director Gorn, we see you now, so it looks like the video is back. And we can move now to our final grant proposal for this meeting, which is the Regionally Advancing Living Shorelines Project. And Marilyn Latta will speak to this item.
Thank you so much, Chair Pine and the Board Authority members. Again, I'm Marilyn Latta, and I'm excited to present this project today. I think they're just pulling up the PowerPoint. Great. So actually, we can go to next slide. So staff recommends consideration and authorization to disperse up to $500,000 to the San Francisco Estuary Institute for monitoring, preparation of guidance on programmatic permitting, and establishment of a framework for collaboration on development of living shorelines projects. These tasks will support the $6 million total project effort to develop new living shorelines projects at 10 locations in the Central Bay. Next slide. But before we talk specifically about the item, I wanted to just step back a bit and share some context and connection to the 20-year campaign goals. There's been a slower start to two goals, as you all know, restoring 500 acres of shellfish habitat and 150 acres of submerged aquatic vegetation habitat. For much of our urban bay history, these areas have been hidden and out of sight and out of mind in San Francisco Bay. They were dredged, filled, and developed more than they were valued for their aquatic habitat, clean water, open space, and green infrastructure. Next slide. There are several reasons why it's challenging to develop subtidal restoration projects. Restoration design planning and methods for these submerged areas is at a newer stage of practice, and it's in its infancy relative to tidal wetlands work, which has been tried and tested since the 1990s. Conditions are challenging and costly to work in. There are cold waters, tides, heavy currents, low visibility, and this all makes it more challenging and requires unique methods and equipment for access and site monitoring. Methods often require beneficial fill, and other complex permitting issues arise in endangered and protected species habitats. And there are fewer experts in design and construction that have experience locally with this work. So capacity building with pilot projects is an important step to increasing the network of participating practitioners and municipalities. That all being said, we've made some great starting progress that I'd like to briefly share. Next slide. Oyster reefs, eelgrass beds, and other habitats can provide valuable natural infrastructure. Seawalls, breakwaters, and levees is necessary in certain locations and will need to be maintained at bigger scales and higher cost. But these structures can cut communities off from the bay, alter sediment transport, and over time, they themselves can become a source of erosion and increased flooding. But it's possible to enhance biologically dynamic borders that provide physical protection, as well as increase our human connections to the natural shoreline and provide climate adaptation. Next slide. The term living shorelines means strategically designing restoration treatments to achieve both biological habitat enhancement and also physical shoreline protection goals. They can include a suite of different techniques and different habitat types, all designed to minimize coastal erosion, maintain coastal processes, and provide natural habitat for plants, fish and wildlife, and people. Regionally, climate risk assessments by county are in process or have been completed, but specific guidance on effective nature-based adaptation methods haven't been substantially developed. For many sites, this requires new design approaches that haven't been tried locally before. Living shorelines provide an opportunity to better connect the less studied underwater nearshore habitats like shellfish reefs and eelgrass beds as a linked gradient with mudflats, beaches, marshes, and other adjacent habitats up the slope. Next slide. We are learning a lot from the East and Gulf Coast and Pacific Northwest, where this type of work has occurred since the early 2000s. We find synergies and also recognize big variations in design approach due to regional factors. One key difference is the smaller tide range on the East Coast that results in different designs that are tucked up closer to the shoreline edge in the higher intertidal and more available for public involvement, while treatments on the West Coast cover a bigger nearshore area farther offshore because of our larger tidal range. Next slide. These living shorelines projects can provide multiple co-benefits. They create fish and wildlife habitat, help attenuate wave energy, accrete sediment, reduce erosion. Some can provide outdoor recreation, and some of these are experimentally being looked at to see if they can sequester carbon and help with buffering ocean acidification. Next slide. There are many site-specific considerations, and one size does not fit all with these projects. Existing uses, community input, parcel ownership, the depths, the orientation of the site, existing species, many of these issues need to be carefully considered. And the lower right map here shows the complexity of parcel ownership in the submerged areas of the bay. The public parcels are in yellow and the private parcels are in red. It's critical to identify the landowners and make sure that they are supportive of the projects. Next slide. But it's a very challenging needle to thread. There are barriers to this innovation, including science and data gaps, institutional inertia, lack of a broader context, and lack of a leadership advocate. And it's important to carefully demonstrate feasibility and success before scaling up and applying lessons learned and practices from pilot projects conducted to date. I really love this picture of the New York shoreline and a sort of fantastical vision of wetlands surrounding New York. In actuality, the depths are maybe more appropriate for different types of habitats like oysters, eelgrass, et cetera. So this all takes careful planning. Next slide. The item before you today is an effort by the San Francisco Estuary Institute and the Coastal Conservancy to work collaboratively with 10 landowners in the Central Bay to design across regions and scale up and increase the pace and effectiveness of new living shorelines projects. The tasks in white will be funded by the $500,000 Restoration Authority grant, including a collaborative forum that will allow the sharing of technical information, discussing design and permitting issues, identifying opportunities to leverage synergies, and fostering a stronger community of living shoreline partners. The actions will all support the tasks in gray that are part of the larger $6 million effort that we are planning and fundraising for now. Next slide. Monitoring is a critical piece to justifying proof of concept, seeding best practices into new designs, and gaining more support for this work. The monitoring through this grant will help to evaluate oyster, eelgrass, and revegetation success, invertebrate fish and bird use of these sites, as well as the physical benefits and effects. Next slide. One of the sites to be monitored is on the San Rafael shoreline at a site originally constructed in 2012. In addition to 4 million native oysters at the height of settlement, we've seen a huge increase in different species using this site, including juvenile Dungeness crab, red rock crabs, salmon and sturgeon, great egrets, American black oyster catchers, and many other species. We've also documented physical benefits, including a 30% decrease in wave energy compared to the mudflat alone. Next slide. Another existing pilot site is in the city of Richmond and first included removal of 420 tons of toxic creosote debris and 460 pilings from the old Red Rocks warehouse site. This site is adjacent to the largest derelict wharf in the bay, which is Terminal 4 to the south, which will be removed next with already approved San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority funding. The restoration at the Red Rock site included construction of oyster reefs and eelgrass, as well as Pacific rockweed plantings, and monitoring at this site will help to inform best practices for the future 10 sites. Next slide. The last site I wanted to share is the Giant Marsh site. This is located in East Bay Regional Park District's Point Pinole Regional Shoreline, also in the city of Richmond, and was constructed in phases from 2019 to 22. The project includes 7 different habitat treatments that range from oyster reefs and eelgrass plantings offshore, seaweed treatments, and tidal marsh and upland ecotone plantings. They are sited at different tidal heights and shoreline orientations and different reef types and materials so that we can monitor what methods will work best alone and in combination. Almost 1 million oysters have settled at this site and plantings are performing well to date. Next slide. It's been really important to develop collaborative partnerships to implement this work. One agency can't do it alone, and any project is stronger with partners. The projects are more connected to the community because of the mix of university researchers and graduate students, consulting firms, nonprofits, and marine contractors who are all working with local, state, and federal agencies to innovate and achieve a common goal. A key goal with this Restoration Authority grant is to establish a Living Shorelines Collaborative, as I mentioned, that will increase the network of residents, community groups, and municipalities that we share information with and engage in design planning and field studies. Next slide. The pilot projects to date have worked with the local Conservation Corps and other youth training opportunities. All of this experimentation provides jobs and skills and training to help Bay Area communities get engaged in the green economy. Next slide. The projects are also assembling teams that include local contractors and consultants. Although many local contractors don't have extensive experience with activities like oyster reef restoration, through this authority grant, we hope to engage more local entities who will get involved and help increase the net of ideas. And ultimately, the goal is to get more projects constructed and help costs go down as methods become more standardized. Next slide. One of the biggest constraints in developing these projects is a lack of understanding about the permits required and the process, and the complexity of state and federal permit mechanisms. Programmatic permit pathways we hope to develop can result in clearer submittal criteria and standardized permit conditions. It's important to think carefully about fill justification, suitable materials, construction methods, and timing, all with a focus on avoidance and minimization of species impacts. These are important environmental requirements that should be considered and protected, and there's great advancement with the BRIT, but there is also a lot of room for improved coordination and decision-making between the agencies. Next slide. In summary, this project is designed to more quickly scale up and normalize these living shorelines approaches. It will help to build capacity, transfer knowledge, will lead to piloting new designs in additional settings, and increasing local labor and involvement. Next slide. Thanks so much for your consideration of this important project. Jeremy Lowe from the San Francisco Estuary Institute is here and would like to say a few brief remarks, and we'd both be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn, and welcome, Jeremy. If you'd like to comment now, that'd be terrific.
He was here. Let's see. I wonder
if he promoted from panelist, from attendee to panelist.
Jeremy, you've been promoted. Maybe just need to unmute.
Thank you for the promotion. Very honored. Okay, so good afternoon, Chair Pine, members of the board. I am Jeremy Lowe, Senior Scientist at the San Francisco S Institute, and I'll be managing this proposed grant with Marilyn. SFEI are very excited about this opportunity to develop a programmatic approach to living shorelines, to advance the Measure AA campaign goals, and to further the integration of subtidal and intertidal restoration approaches. This proposed project builds on nearly a decade of successful pilot-scale projects in the Bay, and these need to scale up quickly to meet the challenges of climate change. We find ourselves in a similar position as we were with tidal marsh restoration at the end of the 1990s. At that time, there were a number of small-scale restorations, experimental in nature, and each requiring considerable effort to implement. We've successfully scaled up tidal marsh restoration by working together to analyze monitoring data, sharing lessons learned, and developing guidance. This grant will help us take a similar approach for living shorelines. The grant will allow us to monitor, to synthesize the lessons learned and best practices from the existing pilot-scale projects. It will help maintain the momentum by working with project partners to develop more high-quality site designs. It will also generate permit pathways to streamline permitting and to reduce green tape. And central to this grant is engagement with a wider net of partners, helping cities, community organizations, other public agencies, and nonprofit groups over some of the major hurdles to implementing living shoreline projects. Thank you for the consideration of this project.
Thank you for joining us today, Jeremy, and your comments. This is really important work. These are goals we've set out, in our, Measure AA objectives, and we definitely want to see the acceleration of projects dealing with subtidal and intertidal areas. Let me check with my colleagues for any comments. We have a question from Dr. Sophie. Excuse me.
Just a question. You, in the presentation, it was noted, I think, a couple of times, sort of, this hasn't been tried as much locally. This is done more on the East Coast. And then it was said that we have a larger tidal range. What exactly does that mean? Is it a less steep slope or stronger waves or more up? Just curious, what is that force that makes it so different here?
That is a great question, Nina. So the eastern seaboard and that continental shelf is much more sloped and shallow, and the tide regime there, the tide exchange is about 2 to 3 feet. So between high tide and low tide is less of a distance at most locations. On the West Coast, that tide regime is about 5 to 7 feet in the range between high and low tide. And when you extend that to our physical shoreline, which is steeper, more complex on the West Coast, that results in us having to place things like oyster reefs and some of these features several hundred meters offshore so that they're at the right low tide or submerged tide range. I hope that helps.
Very much so. Thank you. I also was curious, the forces that destroyed all this habitat and flora and fauna and vegetation and birds and fish, are they no longer, is it just that the habitat was destroyed, or are there other things like the temperature of the bay or toxins, plastics, passage of ships that will continue to have a negative force even in the face of restoration?
That's a really great comment. Everything you just said is true. So not only the development, that original fill in the bay was a major impact. So the bay is about 30% smaller. We've filled in a huge portion of the original margin of the bay. And so we lost an incredible amount of subtidal habitat. But since then, there's been many other factors: pollution, shipping, ongoing development, climate change, heat stress, invasive species. I could say more. So there's certainly a lot of challenges that are impacting these habitats. But what we've seen is that they're persisting, and if we can increase their robustness, they actually help to address some of the impacts that we're seeing with climate change, such as erosion, high wave energy, et cetera.
Thank you so much. It's fantastic work, and excited to see it continue and expand.
Any other comments? Don't see any hands raised, so we'll check with the public for public input.
There are no public comments, sir.
Okay, that brings us to a point where we can take action on the item.
I'll move adoption of the staff recommendation to disperse up to $500,000 as San Francisco Estuary Institute.
I'm happy to second that.
Then we have a motion and a second, and we can proceed to the vote.
Supervisor Joya?
Yes.
Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Director Holman?
Yes.
Councilmember Hahn?
Yes.
Councilmember Lieber?
Aye.
Supervisor Gorn?
Aye.
Chair Pine?
Yes.
This motion passes. Agenda item 14 is approved.
Okay, that completes our grant proposals for the day. And moving to other business, the next item is the appointment of a new advisory committee member. Jessica, would you like to speak to that for a moment?
Yes. Hello again, board members. I have your last action item of the day, but certainly not the last important item. You have before you a resolution to appoint Eric Beeman to the advisory committee. He is the long-range planning manager at BCDC and has more than a decade of coastal management experience in both regulatory and planning sides of the of BCDC and perhaps other agencies. He oversees a team of planners working on a variety of projects aimed at protecting and enhancing San Francisco Bay by updating BCDC's land use plans and policies. And he previously served as BCDC's Bay Resources Permit Program Manager, where he led the permitting for complex projects in and along the San Francisco Bay shoreline, including proposals for habitat restoration and enhancement. And he's served on the BRIT Policy and Management Committee. So I think he'll make an excellent member of the advisory committee. And he is available to say hello to you.
Okay. Yes, Eric would be a tremendous addition to the committee. And I don't think we have any comments at this time from board members or the public. So we could take a motion to approve his appointment.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Proceed to the vote, please.
Supervisor Joya?
Yes.
Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Director Holman?
Aye.
Councilmember Hahn?
Yes.
Councilmember Lieber?
Aye.
Supervisor Gorn?
Aye.
Chair Pine?
Yes.
This motion passes. Agenda item 15 is approved.
Okay. Welcome, Eric, to the advisory committee. We are fortunate to have you join us and look forward to working with you.
If you want to promote him to panelist, then he could greet you. Yeah. See him there.
Is he coming up?
Hi, I'm here. I just want to say thanks, and I'm excited to work with the authority again and help with the work.
Fantastic. Let's now move to our final two items of the day. Both are informational items. The next is our annual performance assessment of the BRIT, which of course is the Bay Restoration Regulatory Integration Team. So we have a number of folks here today to speak to that item. Are we starting with Evian?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Chair Pine and members of the board. I wanted to introduce myself because I'm relatively new to the Bay program. My name's Evan Borgness-Sloan. I'm the new Deputy Regional Manager for the Bay program. I was at the South Coast program previously, and I'm also taking over for project management of the BRIT for the authority, taking over for Amy Hutzel. I'm excited to kick us off with this annual report. We have my two co-presenters here, Sarai Cohen. She's from the US EPA Region 9 and is the current chair of the BRIT Policy and Management Committee, as well as Allison Weber-Stover from NOAA, who is the current chair of BRIT staff. Thank you. And do we have the presentation? Is it possible to get the presentation? Good afternoon, Chairman Pine and members of the board. My name's Allie Weber-Stover, and I go by she, her pronouns. And as Evan said, I'm the NOAA Fisheries representative to the Bay Restoration Regulatory Integration Team. And it's really a pleasure to be here today and present to you our efforts from the 2022 report. And I'm here with my co-presenter, Sarai, who's the EPA's Policy and Management Committee chair. Is there? Could you please put the presentation up if possible? Well, before we start, we would really like to acknowledge that we live and work in the traditional lands of the Muwekma, Ohlone, and Lisjan, and other Chochenyo-speaking people of the eastern San Francisco Bay Area, who stewarded these lands long before any of the arrival of settlers and continue to protect them today.
So just as importantly, we want to acknowledge the subject of this presentation is, oh, there it is, great. Oh, yeah, that's not ours, sorry. Dang it, we're so close. Yeah. Well, yeah, and so we wanted to also acknowledge that these are really living ecosystems that we're going to be talking about, and they were first stewarded and protected by indigenous communities long before the United States Constitution or any of the regulatory acts that, that gave us authority today. So I would say next slide here.
It looks like, sorry, this is Anne. It looks like they do not have your slide. Does anyone have a slide in person where we can actually view it?
I have it on my computer, if that would, can we do that? Or so sorry for the delay. Just a moment.
And we can take a second to get the PowerPoint. Yes, good idea. It's tricky, isn't it?
It's these, we're still adjusting after 2 years to virtual hybrid. Good time for a water break. Good time for a break. All right. Oh, yay. Great. That slide would be perfect. Is it okay to resume or? She'll be first. Sarai, are you going to advance this? Oh, thanks so much. Thanks everyone for your patience. Looks like
before we move on. So those in Zoom, just heads up, we will not be able to see the slide, but we will listen to the presentation.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that.
No, you're good.
Maybe
Go
we'll
ahead.
send the slides afterwards or something.
So I do have a copy I could share at the same time,
That'd be great.
if that's possible.
Yes, Jessica, please share.
Okay.
All right. It takes a village, but we're doing it. Okay. Well, thanks for your patience, everyone. So today we're here to bring you the summary of the BRIT annual report. And as many people know, we started our efforts in 2019 with the primary goal of accelerating the pace of restoration in the San Francisco Bay by improving the permitting process for multi-benefit restoration projects. And we shared our last report to the board in May of 2021, and this year's report summarizes work since that time. Next slide, please. So I'll be reviewing the bulk of the BRIT's core work, including a brief overview of our projects and timelines, lessons we've learned over the past year, and ways that we're really endeavoring to serve the restoration community better by their stakeholder identified needs from within our regulatory frameworks. Sarai Cohen is going to focus on the PMC efforts from the Permit and Policy Improvement List, as well as some of the challenges and recommendations for the future, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some questions. Next slide, please. So this is the BRIT. We are a core team of dedicated staff from 6 agencies, and although it's really hard during the COVID-19 pandemic to get a picture of everyone, we got 5 out of the 6 here, and that's BCDC, the Corps, the Water Board, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I wasn't able to be there that day, and also Dina Boland, our Admin Corps staff, was not there, and Jen Siu from the US EPA is an ad hoc member who's also not in this photo. Next slide, please. So with regard to our projects, this map here shows the 23 multi-benefit restoration projects that we've worked on since inception. 5 additional projects were added since our annual report to you last year. And the 5 that are in dark blue here are the ones that have already been permitted. 3 projects we have right now are in the application phase. Actually, only 2 here are shown in pink, but those are the ones in the application phase. Number 2 should also be in pink. We just received that application last week, so it's not updated. And then the other 15 projects here are all in that pre-application phase. We're working with them before they submit their applications. And it's a little hard to read on this slide probably, but it's in the report that we provided. On the lower left-hand side, there's a table of all 23 projects, and it shows how they all contribute to the different priorities of the Restoration Authority, including safe and clean water, or habitat, or flood protection, and public access. And you can see that the majority of these projects contribute to more than one of those priorities. Next slide, please. This figure is also in the report we provided, and it shows all the projects that we've had up till now and their estimated timelines. In the yellow, you can see that's all the pre-application phase, and the rose color is the application phase, and the green is the construction phase for these projects. The blue arrow at the top represents where all the projects were at the time of the report. And the main purpose of this slide is to show that we are likely going to be very busy next year. We have 3 projects that are already in application phase. We anticipate 3 more by the end of the summer, and if all goes well, 5 more applications by early 2023. And in terms of construction, there should be about 7 projects that have either started construction or will be in construction by this time next year. But I think one thing to note about this slide also is this is a really estimated timeline. Projects are constantly sort of shifting, adjusting to different unforeseen things they didn't anticipate. Sort of the COVID-19 pandemic certainly was a major factor for many projects over the last couple of years. And so the BRIT is really constantly updating this figure and keeping in close contact with projects, because what's most important is that we meet their project timelines. Next slide, please. And we have been adapting and changing our projects, our process since inception. And as we all know, that permitting these multi-benefit restoration projects is a really complex endeavor. There's just so many different laws and constraints that need to be considered. And so the BRIT is really aimed at improving that process, but this slide is sort of meant to show that there are a lot of a lot of things associated with any project. So the figure at the right highlights that for 5 projects we permitted, 36 permits and applications were issued. And for 23 projects, we've held over 89 meetings with project applicants, and that doesn't even include sort of individual meetings between applicants and one individual agency that's also often necessary. So again, it's a vast amount of coordination that's required to get a multi-benefit project permitted in the San Francisco Bay. And the other thing that's probably our first lesson, and a reminder of why the BRIT was formed. There are just so many components to getting things permitted. But the second lesson we have is that early coordination that we were hoping the pre-application would provide is really starting to seem like the key to our success. So although the BRIT's still early in our formation, we do believe we're seeing the signs of that success. We provide those coordinated comments, we meet with applicants and give them our feedback early on and try to work together to solve really complex problems. And we highlight common issues for agencies and identify where there may be places that are going to require further discussion. And because we work so closely, we also are able to avoid providing conflicting guidance to applicants and give them succinct feedback. And the BRIT really promotes open communication and dialogue with project proponents so that we can work together. And even though it's a small number of projects, that's 5 that have been permitted, we do believe the difference between the initial projects we permitted and the ones that have participated in pre-application are submitting more complete applications. We're having less back and forth after the application is submitted. So we do, you know, it's a small number of projects, not a lot of evidence, but we do see like we're seeing progress that we're hoping will continue in the future. We also are placing a really strong emphasis on meeting the project needs. And so I alluded to that in the last slide, but the thing here is that the BRIT really needs to be nimble and adjust our schedules and priorities depending on what's going on with the individual project and their needs at that time so that we are actually meeting their deadlines. And finally, there are a number of strategic regional efforts that are unrelated to individual projects but would significantly improve the permitting process in the long term for project proponents around the Bay. And the BRIT is participating in those kind of efforts, including things like the Wetland Regional Monitoring Program, and that represents about 42 external meetings that we met with other efforts around the Bay for those kinds of efforts. Next slide, please. And so the BRIT has made a number of revisions in our process to better serve the restoration community, and in response to feedback from applicants, we extended the times of our meetings to really make sure we were able to answer all their questions and they could get out of meetings what they needed. We also increased our collaboration internally so that we could make sure we were getting through those discussions and getting back to applicants in a timely manner. And we've continued to revise and update the BRIT website so that we can provide more resources and tools for applicants. And we've also increased our collaboration with scientific experts around the Bay for projects like Marilyn Latta's, living shorelines and complex topics that are coming online, but that have permitting implications for the BRIT. And we've also utilized the newly developed resolution elevation document that the PMC created last year, so that's been helpful as well. And we do believe we're seeing the benefits not only to the pre-application process for agencies, but we also believe the applicants are seeing those benefits as well. For the agencies, like I mentioned, we're seeing more complete applications and less back and forth afterwards, and applicants really seem to be understanding the feedback we're giving them early in the process. And then for project proponents, although again, we've only permitted a few, we've been able to meet timelines, and we've also gotten consistent feedback from applicants that they are overwhelmingly favorable in terms of their interactions with the BRIT, so that's been helpful as well. And now I'm going to pass it over to Sarai to talk about the PMC. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. The Policy and Management Committee is a team of managers from the agencies that comprise the BRIT. And the PMC meets monthly for BRIT updates and also to identify and resolve policy issues in the permitting process. I'm going to first talk about the Permit and Policy Improvement List, and this was provided as an appendix to the annual report. The policy issues on this list are prioritized based on the significance of the issue to the review process, the overall benefit to the program, the benefit to regional restoration goals, and the capacity of the BRIT and PMC to resolve the issue in the short term. And by short term, we mean 2 to 5 years. The rankings are not prescriptive and are intended to categorize issues to identify opportunities. Prioritization is currently in progress and will be revisited as issues are added and removed from the list. In the past year, the PMC has finalized an elevation and resolution process that works on resolving project issues at the BRIT level and within agencies before elevating those issues to resolving at the PMC. Larger and more complex issues may be added to the permit and policy improvement list for additional work and resolution kind of on a programmatic level. Or even there are some issues that we have identified as a need for an administrative or legislative fix that cannot be resolved at either the BRIT or PMC levels. Also this past year, the PMC and BRIT finalized the Aquatic Resources Type Conversion Framework. This is a new process tool that was funded by EPA Region 9 through a contract to SQUIRP and is used to compare different types of wetlands in a watershed context to account for the type conversion during wetland restoration. The reason this is important for the Bay Area is that we actually have a lot of wetland restoration that converts from things like seasonal or agricultural wetlands into tidal restoration or subtidal. And so one of the issues with the regulatory process is that it's not particularly designed to permit things like that. And so we need to account for that when we're doing regulation. And so this tool allows us to put in data and information, and then we can use those to guide our regulatory decision making. This tool was actually tested and refined by the BRIT in the past year as a pilot program, and so it's now on version 2, and it's published on the SQUIRP website. EPA is planning to do outreach and training on this tool in 2022 and 2023. As we all know, permitting multi-benefit restoration projects within the existing regulatory framework is challenging and complex. We are also using the BRIT and PMC experience to work on these challenges and to develop recommendations to improve the permit process, not just for BRIT projects, but also for other restoration projects. Type conversion, which can come from planned restoration, but also that is planned into projects to account for climate change and rising sea levels, is an anticipated challenge that we expect the BRIT to review during restoration projects. We can use the type conversion framework to analyze these impacts within a watershed context to assist in regulatory decision making. We recommend that restoration practitioners begin to account for these changes over time in project design and in the information that is used for project selection. Nature-based solutions like ecotone levees have often not been tested on a large-scale basis and increase the uncertainty for restoration project outcomes. We are consulting with technical experts to learn more about these methods and their design and function. We recommend that project proponents provide information on project-specific ecosystem functions and benefits so that the agencies can analyze the short-term impacts and the trade-off with long-term benefits of these restoration projects. We believe that that information will help us accelerate the regulatory process. And then, as several projects have mentioned before, restoration project monitoring can be used for both project-specific success and in evaluating methods of restoration and regional goals. Funding these appropriate and useful monitoring is often a challenge for the individual restoration projects. We think that this can be improved both by early development of monitoring plans within the pre-application process of the BRIT, and also through the regional collaborative efforts like the WRMP. Measure AA can provide grant funding for project monitoring and evaluation that can help individual project proponents and also supports the regional efforts. The WRMP can guide projects in developing robust monitoring standards that satisfy both the agency's regulatory requirements and also support a network of data collection that can improve the entire Bay restoration implementation and management. This is an important time as the restoration community and regulatory agencies work collaboratively to achieve our shared goals of habitat restoration, flood control, public access, and shoreline resiliency. There continue to be many challenges of permitting these complex projects in the existing regulatory environment. The BRIT and PMC are working hard to provide certainty to restoration practitioners on requirements and project timelines. With the continued effort and flexibility of agencies, project planners, and the restoration community, we can achieve our goals of more restoration in the Bay. And we'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your presentations. It's really great to hear about the progress the BRIT has made, and obviously are getting busier and going to have a really important year coming up. Any questions or comments? Yes.
Well, I just wanted to thank you for this incredible presentation, and it's so complex with coordination, so it's really terrifying to think of what this might be like without it. I just want to congratulate you for this complicated and important work, and thank you for the continued improvement and engagement to make it a better process in real time and in the long run. So thank you.
And Director Gorin has your hand raised.
I do. I also wanted to thank you for the very detailed report about the successes and perhaps the challenges of the future. And a note of congratulations to the leadership of the Restoration Authority, BCDC, and the other agencies for recognizing the need for such a interactive and a collaborative working group to move these projects forward. So congratulations to all, and thank you for your work on this.
And let's see if we have any public comment.
We do not have any public comments, sir.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps up the item for today. Again, thank you for the presentation and for your, fantastic efforts in, bringing us all together to expedite permitting in the regulatory process. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
So our last item for the day is an update on our tribal engagement policy, and Erica Johnson will speak to that.
Thank you. Great, thank you for my slides. Good afternoon, Chair Pine, board members and members of the public. I'm Erica Johnson, a project manager with the Restoration Authority. And today I present a discussion item, which is the development of a tribal engagement policy for the Restoration Authority. The policy will be a continuation of the authority's efforts and commitment to advancing equity and justice goals. Our agency serves a region that encompasses the unceded homelands of the Ohlone, Miwok, Wapo, and Patwin-speaking people, who were the original inhabitants and stewards of these lands for thousands of years. The descendants of these larger language groups are represented today by over 30 different tribal bands. Our history of state-sanctioned genocide, enslavement, obstruction of tribal sovereignty, as well as ongoing cultural erasure and racism towards Native people, continue to cause trauma and limit access to resources for Native communities in our region and also across the country. Authority staff have learned to recognize the privilege and power we hold in the Bay by funding the protection and restoration of shoreline habitats. And so our goal is to work with tribes to allow for equitable access to the Measure AA grant program. And we hope that this will result in more projects led or co-managed by tribes. Next slide, please.
Erica, can you wait 1 second? We can hear you really well, but we don't see the PowerPoint yet.
It just came up, yeah.
Oh, it just came up. Okay, it's happening.
It's on the Zoom, but
Great, thank you.
It's on the Zoom, but it's not in the room.
We have it.
Oh, they're turning it on. Okay. Great. Go ahead, Erica. Sorry.
Great, thank you. We prepared this memo prior to reaching out to the different tribes of the region in order to alleviate the burden of requests to tribes, because many agencies are currently undergoing a similar process to obtain feedback. So our approach is to first take advantage of other agencies' listening sessions and then directly engaging the region's tribes for targeted input. And just want to reiterate that their input and review of our development of this policy are paramount before recommending any policy or best practices for adoption by the authority. Next slide, please. Within the memo, we summarized a few recurring themes from tribal members' feedback, which were provided through other agencies' listening sessions, focus groups, and surveys. With each key theme, we provided an example of some actions the authority could consider taking to meet the need. And so some of these themes we summarized are included but not limited to setting aside funds for tribes. Tribes often don't have the capacity to compete for funding, and so the authority will need to consider whether to expand the community grants program to include tribes or create a separate dedicated program for tribes. We will also be exploring our potential role in the movement to return lands to tribes. The next item is supporting capacity building for tribes. Capacity is a major barrier for effective engagement and partnerships with tribes to address environmental issues. Resources for building that capacity should include, but are not limited to, grant funds that allow for capacity building, compensation for tribal members' time, and Restoration Authority staff providing technical support to develop eligible projects, and also designating an authority staff member to serve as tribal liaison. The next item is building the capacity of the authority. The authority must also be able to engage with tribes in a culturally competent manner. And so some considerations include incorporating feedback from tribes into our policies, learning from best practices developed by agencies who work directly with tribes, and coordinating communication with tribes early, efficiently, and often. The next item is to promote culturally relevant restoration work. Tribes have called for traditional ecological knowledge, ethnobotany, and tribal management practices to be included in restoration projects. And they've also called for the protection of areas that have cultural and spiritual value to tribes. So some considerations include incentivizing restoration-focused agencies and organizations to partner with tribes, and providing opportunities to tribes to share examples of successful partnerships that utilize tribal management practices. Next slide, please. In the memo, we provided some examples of restoration projects that have strong tribal leadership and our partnerships as examples of what we would strive for in future authority-funded projects. To provide a brief overview, I've listed 4. The first of which is an authority-funded project, Youth Engagement and Service Learning in East Oakland project. It consists of a partnership with Planting Justice, Save the Bay, and Socorro Tay Land Trust to develop a curriculum centered on topics that include bay habitat restoration, native shoreline plant identification, environmental justice issues, and land rematriation in the bay. Next project is Mount Umunhum Public Access Restoration. This is a partnership between Mid-Peninsula Open Space Trust District and the Amamutsin Land Trust, which resulted in the construction of a sacred circle for Native people to hold ceremony. Next is the Native Stewardship Corps. The Amamutsin Land Trust created their own ecological restoration program whose sole participants are tribal members. And this Stewardship Corps has been working on the restoration of San Vicente redwoods in Santa Cruz County in partnership with the Open Space Trust. And the last example is the Point Reyes National Seashore Partnership. The Federated Indians of Grattan Rancheria and the National Park Service signed a 20-year government-to-government agreement sharing responsibility in restoring Point Reyes, which include tribal management practices. So these are a few examples. There are many more of successful tribal co-management or tribal-led projects involving ecological restoration. In the memo, we also included a tentative timeline for developing a tribal engagement policy. However, it will be subject to change depending on the availability and capacity of tribes. Lastly, I would like to thank staff from the State Coastal Conservancy, Ocean Protection Council, San Francisco Estuary Partnership, and the advisory committee members, and also others who have provided the resources and suggestions that have allowed for us to begin this process. With that, I would like to welcome any questions, comments, or recommendations that the board members have that might inform how we move forward developing this policy.
Thank you, Erica, for the presentation. It's great that we're piggybacking on the efforts of other agencies. Do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks,
Okay.
Chair Pine. My question is, what is the difference between a tribal consultation policy, which we have seen in other agencies like the Coastal Commission when I sat on that body, and an engagement policy? And it sounds like, from what I read in the staff memo, it's more about engaging tribes in participating in or formulating projects as compared to a more formal tribal consultation over other existing or other agencies' projects. Is that the distinction? And why are we
Yes,
not
but-
pursuing a formal tribal consultation policy? I mean, this is totally laudable, and I absolutely support it. But where does the role of a true tribal consultation fall?
Well, a tribal consultation policy is usually a formal government to government consultation. And although that's something that we're still going to explore as part of our policy, not all tribes are federally recognized. We are hoping to include federally and state recognized tribes, as well as potentially intertribal councils, and other tribal groups that aren't able to receive that recognition. So our engagement is to be really inclusive, and acknowledging that not all tribes have that recognition that trigger other agencies to do that formal consultation. So I think that was the distinction that we were trying to make here. And in terms of engagement, I think we wanted to go a step further to be able to work with tribes and co-develop eligible projects to be funded by the Restoration Authority. And so I think the involvement of the tribes with, more in-depth engagement versus consulting them on a project that may be occurring without their leadership, is kind of the distinction we're trying to make with the engagement policy.
And I can jump in for a minute and add something else that we discussed with our legal counsel, is the fact that, when the state does government to government consultations with tribes, it's the state, whereas the Restoration Authority is a regional agency, and it's not a state, and it's not a city, it's not a county. So, I mean, we will definitely be having conversations with the tribal representatives about what sorts of consultations they would like to have, for example, with our executive officer, our chair, if that's something that they would like us to do on a regular basis. We'll certainly be taking that input from them and having, a regional version of a government to government consultation, but it won't have that same formal level that a state government to government consultation would have.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add, the California Natural Resources Agency has an undersecretary for tribal affairs, Geneva. I think her last name is Thompson. And she's been providing lots of support and training workshops for the various agencies and departments within resources. And I just attended a workshop a couple weeks ago that she held. And one thing she really emphasized was we should view the project consultations as opportunities to develop longer term relationships. There's, the tribes are receiving lots of consultation letters, formal consultation letters from state agencies, and doing, these government to government consultations. But really what we want this to lead to are partnerships, long-term partnerships where the tribes are leading or co-leading on given restoration efforts. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Or any input from the public?
There are no public comments, sir.
Okay, well, this was an information item. Appreciate the updates, and we'll be looking forward to hearing more over the next 12 months or so. And that brings us to the end of the meeting and our adjournment. So thank you for attending today, and we'll see you actually not until October. But have a good...
Except for BCDC.
Except for BCD. Have a good summer. Okay.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Okay.
Are you just in a board meeting at all times?
What's that?
I said, are you in board meetings at all times?
I'm in a lot of meetings, yeah. Yeah.
Well, with all the different sort of additional agencies that you sit on.
Yeah, I've definitely got a lot of balls.